China just delivered a shock Washington never expected. Beijing has instructed every Chinese company to stop purchasing American-made chips. Practically overnight, the pipeline of U.S. semiconductors flowing into China's enormous tech sector has been shut off, and honestly, the first aftershocks are already being felt. Scott Bessent, Wall Street's genius investor turned U.S. Treasury Secretary, is said to be in full panic mode. Donald Trump believed he had designed a clever trap. He loosened restrictions so Nvidia could sell its new H20 AI chips to China, assuming Beijing would line up to buy. From Washington's perspective, the plan looked flawless. China gets advanced processors, U.S. companies make billions, and the Treasury takes a 15% cut on each sale. For Trump, it was supposed to be simple money: technology, profit, and leverage all packaged together. But China didn't just decline. They slammed the door shut and locked it. Xi Jinping's administration ordered Chinese companies to cancel purchases not only from Nvidia, but from AMD as well, wiping out two of America's biggest chip suppliers in one move. Then Beijing issued new rules banning U.S. chips from all government-supported projects. The message couldn't have been clearer. China is finished playing by Washington's terms. This isn't about whether the H20 is powerful or whether American chips are still ahead. It's about control. Beijing wants the world to understand it won't be boxed in by U.S. technology or trapped in dependency. What Washington tried to frame as a victory has been turned into a very public setback, and the fallout stretches far beyond a single failed deal. For decades, U.S. chip makers have relied heavily on China, earning billions from its enormous market. Without Chinese buyers, their future revenue and their global leadership comes under threat. And, the timing couldn't be worse. America is already weighed down by debt, inflation, and political instability. Losing its biggest tech customer now is like yanking the foundation out from under an already unsteady economy. This is no longer just trade. It's a contest for global influence. And at this moment, Beijing looks focused and calculated, while Washington stumbles through missteps. Before we break down how this all began, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss the full analysis. Let's dive in. Let's take this step by step, because what's happening now didn't appear suddenly. It comes from years of U.S. policies that, ironically, helped create the exact situation Washington hoped to avoid. For more than a decade, the U.S. strategy was simple: keep China away from the most advanced semiconductors. Administrations from both parties followed the same playbook: tighten exports, block access to top-tier processors, and restrict the sale of key design tools and manufacturing equipment. The logic seemed straightforward. If China couldn't acquire cutting-edge chips, its progress in AI, supercomputing, and advanced manufacturing would slow down. On paper, it looked smart. But while Washington drafted restrictions, Beijing was building. China poured tens of billions into its homegrown semiconductor industry. Entire tech parks were created for fabrication plants. Universities expanded engineering programs, training thousands of specialists. Local governments provided subsidies for everything from chip design to lithography equipment. Progress wasn't perfect at first, but it was steady. And sometimes, China closed gaps analysts thought would take 10 years in just 4 or 5. That should have raised alarms. Yet Washington continued assuming China would stay dependent much longer. Then came Trump's trade war, and China's progress sped up even more. Tariffs on Chinese goods, sweeping sanctions on tech firms, and more chip restrictions were launched one after another. The goal was to weaken Beijing's negotiating position. But the effect was the opposite. China treated the pressure as a national mission to escape reliance on U.S. suppliers. Being cut off became motivation to accelerate. Supply chains were rebuilt from the ground up. Investment in domestic alternatives surged. What was once a long-term vision turned into an urgent, all-hands priority. Eventually, Washington realized its own companies were bleeding due to these restrictions. Nvidia, Qualcomm, Intel, all deeply tied to China, were losing billions in sales. So Trump adjusted the plan. Nvidia's H20 chip, custom made for China to meet export rules, was put back on the table. To make it a political win, he added a 15% tax on each sale and pitched it as a boost for the U.S. economy. In theory, China gets hardware, American firms get their biggest customer back, the Treasury gets a huge cash flow, but Beijing didn't fall for it. Guidance went out instructing Chinese firms to cancel all U.S. chip orders, including the H20. And the timing was intentional. By then, China had introduced its own high-performance AI systems like DeepSeek, proving that domestic tech could compete with, or even surpass, Western platforms. Its debut rattled the industry because it confirmed what Washington hoped wasn't true. China no longer needed U.S. hardware to advance. And remember, the H20 wasn't even the real thing. It was a downgraded model, intentionally weakened to comply with U.S. rules. From Beijing's perspective, this wasn't a partnership. It was an insult. Pay more for a weaker chip, and on top of that, let Washington take a cut? That didn't look like cooperation. It looked like dependence with a toll booth. So Beijing made its move. They halted U.S. chip imports and turned it into a public show of confidence. Their message to Washington Chinese companies will not build their future on American processors. Their message to the world, China is ready to stand on its own. This moment goes far beyond rejecting one chip. It shows how drastically the balance has shifted. For the U.S., the ban signals that the restriction strategy has reached its breaking point. For China, it's proof that years of preparation are finally paying off. When we talk about America's dependence on China in tech, we're not discussing a small side market. We're talking about one of the largest consumer and industrial ecosystems on the planet. A market so crucial that losing it can shake entire companies. Take Apple. China has long been both a major market and its core production base. In 2023, nearly 19% of Apple's global revenue came from Greater China, nearly 1 out of every $5. And it's not just iPhone sales, it's the factories, suppliers, and logistics that keep Apple's global rollouts running. If Beijing tightens restrictions, Apple suffers twice, falling sales and production delays. Then look at Nvidia, the face of America's AI boom. In 2022, roughly a quarter of its data center revenue came from China. AI labs and cloud providers in China ordered thousands of GPUs, but export rules forced Nvidia to produce cut-down models like the A800 and H20. Without full access, Nvidia risks losing billions. Analysts say smooth China sales could have added about $15 billion, earnings now off the table, or Qualcomm. Its chips power Chinese smartphone brands like Xiaomi, Oppo, and Vivo. In 2023, China accounted for 64% of Qualcomm's total revenue. Without that volume, Qualcomm can't fund the R&D needed to stay competitive globally. Even companies less tied to hardware feel the impact. Microsoft earns steady revenue in China from software licenses, enterprise tools, and Azure cloud partnerships. Tesla, though not purely a tech company, depends on China both as a production hub and as one of its largest EV markets. The Shanghai Gigafactory alone produces hundreds of thousands of cars per year. What links all these companies is scale. China isn't just another large market, it's a unique one. Hundreds of millions of middle-class consumers, enormous infrastructure projects, and corporate buyers capable of placing orders few countries can match. That scale doesn't just increase revenue, it enables entire industries. And this is where politics collides with economic reality. In Washington, decoupling has become a popular slogan, but the numbers tell a different story. For America's biggest tech firms, China isn't optional, it's essential. If Beijing fully closes the door, the shock would hit company earnings and Wall Street indexes within hours. Now let's bring Scott Bessant into the picture. Bessant isn't just another Wall Street billionaire. He made his name betting on global markets, and later became one of Trump's main economic thinkers. Today, he stands at the center of U.S. financial strategy as Treasury Secretary, and this chip confrontation has pulled him straight into crisis management. What's striking is that Bessant may not fully support the hardline approach. Reports say he understands how destructive China's chip ban could be for U.S. companies. Nvidia, Qualcomm, Intel, all losing orders. Each cancellation wipes out billions. And for the person responsible for stabilizing America's finances, that's a disaster he can't ignore. Insiders say Bessent has quietly looked for ways to soften the damage, maybe even reopen dialogue with Beijing. But here's the problem. Once China takes a step like this, you can't fix it with a quick phone call. Trust has already been broken. Even if a temporary deal is reached, Chinese companies will be wary of depending heavily on U.S. suppliers again. That's the real danger. This isn't about a single contract. It's the beginning of a long-term shift in global tech trade. And the ripple effects go far beyond chip makers. Semiconductors power everything: phones, electric vehicles, cloud servers, medical devices, weapon systems. If China designs its products to run on domestic or non-US chips, entire ecosystems, upgrades, software, intellectual property could evolve without American involvement. That's not just lost revenue, it's lost influence. The foundation of US technological dominance. The world is watching. If Beijing proves it can replace US chips without losing performance, other nations may start diversifying too. Each step away from American suppliers gives China more room to expand. And with every shift in market share, Washington's grip on tech leadership loosens. For decades, America's supremacy in semiconductors has been the backbone of its global power. And with one decisive move, Beijing is testing how fragile that supremacy really is. Across the United States, manufacturers are waking up to a new reality. The components and materials they rely on, specialized equipment, precision parts, even basic inputs, are becoming more expensive, harder to find, and sometimes not arriving at all. What used to be a dependable flow of imports has turned into delays, rising shipping costs, and endless paperwork. The impact is immediate. Orders that once filled entire shifts are slowing. Managers are cutting hours, scaling back production, or shutting down lines altogether. Workers who were promised stability under the banner of bringing jobs back now face shrinking paychecks and half-empty warehouses. What was advertised as an industrial comeback now resembles a survival struggle. And this isn't only about China. The trade conflict has broadened, straining relations with United States allies as well. Europe, Asia, and others are rethinking their partnerships with Washington. Constant tariff threats and unpredictable policy swings have left them questioning whether the United States is still a reliable partner. Increasingly, the answer seems to be no. That's why countries are quietly building alternative systems outside United States influence. Regional trade blocs, new financial networks, and agreements that bypass Washington entirely. Once these structures are firmly established, America won't be able to dictate terms the way it has for decades. And that's the wider reality. While United States officials chase short-term wins, the global trading system is being rebuilt without them. The danger isn't just higher costs today, it's the moment the world realizes it no longer needs America to keep things running. When that moment arrives, United States leverage won't just weaken, it may collapse. So the question now is simple. Has Washington already lost its ability to shape the global economy? Or is there still a path back? If you want to follow these shifts and see where they lead, be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. See you in the next one.